Hi everybody, welcome to Sight and Sound Theater. I'm Dr. Marla and I'm so excited because today on the program we have the owner of Sight and Sound Theater, Kim Miller. You don't want to miss it. Hello Kim, welcome to my program, and I'm so excited to have you. This is so amazing. We're on the set of Sight and Sound Theater here in Branson, Missouri. Kim Miller is the daughter of the founder of Sight and Sound Theater. Your dad and you and your family have two theaters, one in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and one here in Branson, Missouri. You have a few roles that you play within the theaters. You're the ministry coordinator.
Right.
And so I'll give kind of your other roles as we go, but tell us a little bit what you do as the ministry coordinator.
The easiest way to say it is I have external responsibilities and internal responsibilities. We also have a really cool ministry every day to our guests, and that is we offer prayer. And so we have a large amount of our employees who volunteer their time to pray for guests at the end of each show. And again, that happens here, that happens back home. So I also give oversight to all of our prayer teams and training them and supporting them and also being part of it. I try once a week to be at the front of the stage myself, to be there to pray for guests. Anything that can bring support, encouragement, prayer to our employees, I do that internally too. We have a great culture at Sight and Sound, and our supervisors and managers do an awesome job of taking care of their flock, their own little teams, and I'm just an extension of them and really a representative of my family sometimes to give some extra care when they may be going through a life event, whether that life event is exciting or sad or difficult. I try to be there for them. So that's a little bit my responsibilities in a nutshell.
Well, and what I'm hearing from you is it's not just a production, it's a calling.
Yes,
your family has
absolutely.
a calling, and you all are ministering not only externally but internally, and I think that's such a beautiful display of what Christ would want.
Yeah, that's right. It is a calling. You know, maybe some people know this and some don't, but in 1997, we weren't even in Branson, Missouri. This had not even really been thought of yet, but we had a very devastating fire at our theater in Lancaster, and in one day we lost the entire facility. We no longer had a theater, and that was really the conclusion that my parents came to during that very difficult time in those few days or weeks of processing. Do we really want to start again? And the one real monumental moment was when my mom said to my dad, I don't know that this is really a choice because it's a calling, and when it's a calling, it's really an obedience to the Lord. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of us that are really happy that they sensed that in that time and decided to go for it again. Because if they wouldn't have, we would not have been here. We would not be here today.
Right.
Millions and millions of people would not have experienced the shows and thus the gospel had that decision not been made. But the core of that decision was made in a very difficult moment. But it was made out of the premise, this is a calling. This is not just a job. This is not just a business. This is a calling to spread the gospel to really the whole world, because we have people come to our theaters from all over this planet.
And that's so exciting. You're sharing the Bible. And I wonder how many people stumble in with someone that's invited them, that they're taking them to a show and they get to see the Bible displayed and how God works on their heart. And things can happen in their lives during that time period that maybe wouldn't have happened if they hadn't have stumbled in here.
Absolutely.
But take me back, Kim. You and I have visited before, and I know your dad and mom, the founders, did not set out when they were younger and when you were a child and say, oh, I think the vision for our life and is to go and have a theater and have the Bible displayed like in a Broadway production. That wasn't what your father set out to do. Take me back to how your dad began.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting story, and I'll try to condense it greatly. My dad was raised on a farm. My parents were both raised very, very, very conservatively. I don't think they ever entered theaters. They had no understanding of what theater world was. But when they got married, my dad became very interested in photography, and my dad had always been very interested in art. From the time he was, I believe, 8 years old, he was doing artwork with painting. And the photography was really birthed out of that because he would go to local farms, take pictures of the farm, come back and develop that picture and use that as his model, so to speak, to then paint to that farm. And then he would take that picture of the farm to the farmer and say, "Do you want to buy the picture that I just painted of your farm?" That really was their humble beginnings. And so Dad's photography business expanded. He started traveling this entire country, taking pictures. He has to have millions of pictures in his library today. An interesting fact, my dad turns 80 in September, and so it's been, 60 years of him taking pictures. So there's a lot. And so that birthed something where some local churches and organizations were saying, "We'd love to see your pictures. Would you want to assemble them together in some kind of like a slide production?" Back then it was called slides.
Right.
We don't hear that verbiage anymore, really. But they did that. Mom kind of read some poetry and they stuck some songs in there. And they started going from church to church. And as a child, I just remember them traveling all the time with these slide productions that really they were being asked to go out on the road just constantly. And that led them probably right around 1974, 75 to say, what would happen if we would rent a local Bible college? There's a local Bible college in Lancaster, rent their auditorium for the summer and show our slide production on a big screen. Maybe people would come to us and we wouldn't have to travel so much. And that's exactly what happened. That place was packed all summer long, which gave them enough money to say, okay, we're going to build our own theater, but it was solely and only to show these slide productions. So in 1976, our first theater opened, was called Living Waters Theater, but again, the intent was only for these slide productions. But as the years would go along, Dad would have these creative ideas. At Easter, what would happen if I would take my 4 daughters and stick them in big Easter eggs and have them dance around the stage? And
you got to be a part of that,
I
didn't
was dancing Christmas tree, dancing egg, and little by little, Dad just, is a very creative person, and he would just add little pieces in along with his slide production. But the tables started to change in the sense that over the years, as more pieces were added, there was more live stage than there was on the screen. And in 1987, the tables really changed in that it was our very first year that we went to an all live stage production, and that was our first year of Behold the Lamb, which I think I would say was the production that started to put Sight and Sound on the map. We started to now see bus groups come. And so it was really the humble beginnings. The Bible says don't despise the day of small beginnings.
That's right.
And really our story, my parents' story, as I said, they knew nothing about theater, no intent for it to ever be what it is today. And yet God is faithful. And I love the verse that says he orders the steps of a righteous man, because many times in our lives, we can't see beyond the next step. And our only responsibility is to follow that next step, whether it is a dancing Easter egg or a dancing Christmas tree. Those small peepee steps end up being what it is today. But this just didn't plop in our lap. It was step after step after step after step of obedience. And then one day, the big calling, go to Branson, Missouri. But you don't do that until you've done a lot of peepee steps to get to that place.
Right.
And so that's what I like to tell people, follow the Lord in the small steps that he asks you to take. Because really, that's the only promise we have, that he's going to tell us. He doesn't tell us normally what the next mile is going to be. He just tells us what the next step is going to be. And it's our responsibility to follow that step, and then he'll tell us what the next step is. So that's how it started.
Now, you came to Branson. Tell us how you transitioned the thought process and kind of the internal process of looking at Branson. You heard of it, and you came, I think you told me, the family came and prayed over the property. So kind of tell me what happened during that time. It's so interesting to me.
Yeah. We have been asked, again, I don't have an exact number, but I believe I'd be safe to say hundreds, if not thousands of times that people have contacted us and said, will you please bring one of your theaters to our location?
All over the nation then, people wanted
world.
it.
All over the
world. Okay.
Absolutely. Israel, yeah, you can name it.
Really?
People
Okay.
have asked us to come. And it's a big undertaking, as one would suspect. And so it was the early 2000s that Mom and Dad really started to feel serious about, is the Lord asking us to expand? Is the Lord asking us to go to another part of the country? And I honestly had never been here with them, but they had traveled to Branson several times and had known that it was a big theater, capital and community here. And so it became kind of a focus. It's a Bible Belt here. We knew that we'd probably slot in pretty well. And so, yeah, there were several trips made, especially by my dad and his right-hand man, whose name was Doyle. And they finally landed upon the property that we're sitting on now and invited the whole family to come. And we did. We came as an entire family, except I think my daughter, who was too far along in her pregnancy and wasn't allowed to drive. But I think the rest of us were here and stood on this very property when it was nothing more than a field and trees. And I remember seeing deer on the property in the morning. We'd wake up and there was a hotel right here. So we'd wake up and see deer. And I remember us making a circle and holding hands on this property and saying, Lord, if this is what you want and if this is what you are calling us to, then we'll be obedient in taking that next step. And it wasn't easy. We knew nobody in Branson, Missouri. It wasn't like we had all these connections and we knew we'd have support and we'd have a team. We knew nobody. So this leap of faith was monumental for us at the time. But we went home, and I'll never forget the day sitting around the board table and having to make that decision. Those moments are good for us to remember through the hard times, because I remember as a board and as a family, we all knew that this is what God was asking of us. And it's kind of like you put that stake in the ground, and when the hard times come, and they did, believe me, they did, you can look back on that moment, the moment when we stood here and prayed, and you can say, Lord, it's hard. We don't see the light to take the next step forward, but we know what the call was. So you don't call us to something that you don't then deliver on. And so it was that perseverance and staying faithful, but it was those stakes in the ground of the decisions we made, feeling and believing that we were making them from the leading of the Lord to come to this place.
Well, it's a really interesting, when I hear you talk, I think about Matthew 19:26, with man it's impossible, but with God all things are possible.
That's right.
It's just following him, isn't it?
That's exactly right. It is.
Now I know, I think it's interesting, I want you to take me back a little bit when the fire happened. And I know that was a dark time you'd mentioned. How did they come out from under that financially?
It was not easy. It was an absolute step of faith, let me tell you. The demolition of the building, which was called the Entertainment Center, that was nothing but bent steel and blackness inside. I'll never forget, we walked through the building. We probably shouldn't have, but we walked through the building days after the fire, and it was something else. I'll just say it that way.
Very dark time, wasn't it?
It was a very dark time, and I believe, it was another God time, because the demolition of the old building and the building of the new building, which is now called the Millennium Theater, none of the funding for that was in place at all, and we still started. It was truly by faith. None of the funding was in place. And Mom and Dad would have these details better than I do, but what I do know is The people that had been contracted to build the Millennium Theater gave us a certain amount of time that they said, okay, we'll start, but by such and such a date, you are going to have, at least a level of funding. And so those few weeks of that interim time where funding was not yet together, the building was already being built, and there was not the funding put together. But again, the calling was there, the knowing was there that it is to take place. And so even though it's not easy, you have eyes of faith in those moments. And I often say probably one of the most precious times that I'll never forget watching my dad was through that time, because it was really dark. It was heavy. It was like a spirit of heaviness that fell on our family. And what I've often said is really cool is that within days, just not weeks, days of the fire, the Lord had given my dad the vision for what the Millennium Theater should look like, which is almost an exact replica of the outside of this building. And if you have seen the outside, which I know you have, you'll attest, it's gorgeous. And it is something so vital in our lives when we're in those moments of darkness, to allow God to plant in our heart fresh vision. And I saw my dad almost start to pull out of that darkness faster than the rest of the family, because he was seeing the fresh vision. He was seeing the new life. He was seeing the new growth, so to speak. And he set his eyes on that versus the darkness and the fire and the charred building. And he started to have the hope and the vision, because the Lord was implanting in his heart the vision for the new and the bigger and the better. I think I can say it that way. I'll never say God caused the fire, but he does a glorious job of bringing beauty from ashes, and we saw that. And literally millions upon millions of people have been ministered to since 1998, when we reopened the Millennium Theater back home. And I often say this too, God uses everything. So there was a testing of our faith as a family through that fire and rebuilding. And I do believe there were seeds that were planted us that expanded our faith, so that when the call came to take this ginormous step to Branson, Missouri, it was just like there was an extra boatload of faith in all of us to do it. Because we could say, if God can get us through that devastation, he'll get us through anything that we may face out here.
And people listening, you're helping them with their vision and what God's put in them, to think, if God can do that for
That's
you,
right.
and can do that for your dad and your family, think about the people that they have these seeds of something that God's put in them for a vision, and they think, oh, I don't know if that could be possible.
Yeah.
But if you just take a step of faith, like you're saying,
all things are possible.
all things are possible.
Yeah, that's right.
And so this is here. I've been here several times. Tell me some of the shows that you've produced through Sight and Sound Theater between Lancaster and here.
Okay. Well, we've had a lot on stage. I believe when we opened up in 2008, I know we had Noah, and that ran, I believe, for 4 years straight. Since Noah, we've done Samson, we've done Jonah, we've done Moses, we've done Miracle of Christmas. There might even be a few scattered in there.
Is there Esther?
Joseph. Esther is actually premiering next year back home in Lancaster. That's a brand new show for us.
I'm going to have to fly out and see that.
You are, and then spend some time with me.
I would love it.
Yeah,
I love the story
Esther
of Esther.
premieres next year back home. So that'll eventually come here, but there's no time slotted for that yet. Our shows always premiere in Lancaster, and then a couple years down the road, we'll land in Branson. So, yeah.
Well, and the Miracle of Christmas, if the people listening haven't seen that.
That was actually produced by my dad.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
He wrote the script and everything?
Yeah, well, there's
Produced it?
always a team that works with the
works
script
with
writing, but he would have been very involved with that writing. Miracle has been around for a long time and continues to just draw so many people every year. We don't have the Christmas show every single year. We tend to do it every other year. But it's just been a beautiful portrayal of the birth of Jesus, and what all that story entails, what Mary went through, what Joseph went through, and the faith that they had to walk in, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, You're talking about faith that your parents went through to take that step of faith, same faith that Mary and Joseph took. I mean, can you imagine what they went through?
Yeah, that's right.
Telling them
And the
that they're going to have a
ridicule,
baby.
you know, yeah, because I
Right.
even remember when we were building here in Branson, we faced a lot of ridicule. Sometimes you have to kind of turn your head and not listen to it.
Right.
Very same story as Noah. You know, he knew he had a call from God.
Right.
And he was called to build something really big. We were called to build something really big, and the community didn't always understand that call. And that's okay. How would they know? But sometimes you have to turn a deaf ear to the ridicule to obey the call of God. And actually, we have to do that a lot, don't we?
We do.
Because there's a lot of times in our lives that we're called to do something that others around us may not understand. And it's not that we don't listen to good advice, right?
Right.
But the primary voice we need to listen to and obey is the voice of the Lord, for sure.
And it's not every day that people have a call to do something this massive. I mean, this is a massive production and undertaking, financially, with their physical bodies involved. With
That's right.
I mean, I can't imagine what they went through at times. The growth spurts that I'm hearing you talk about would have had to have just stretched them immensely.
Absolutely.
At times.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think there's definitely been seasons of stretching. I think primarily the one was the fire, secondly was coming here. This was a stretching for a couple years because it wasn't just landing in a community or in a part of the country that never heard of us. When you think about what 2008 was and the financial situations that we were going through as a country, that played into it as well.
So it
was a very interesting year to open. So yes, it was years of challenge and trusting and staying true to the Lord and knowing that our job is to just keep doing what we're called to do, right? His job is to provide. And that's where we can rest, and we have to rest.
Well, I can't imagine you saying that just now, how internally you all would probably have this like spirit versus the flesh type of thing, knowing the country. You said in 2008 is when we had all the financial crises.
Absolutely.
And that's when you were bringing this theater into being, trusting God financially to bring it in. I didn't realize that lined up with when the whole country was going and homes were folding under, and
it's
so
not
you had
a
to
good
say,
time.
God, we trust you.
That's right.
In the midst of financial crisis to meet the needs
Mm-hmm.
of what you would need to meet for a new staff, a new building.
Absolutely.
I can't imagine.
Yeah, there were several years of asking the question: are we going to survive? But we did, and we will. And I often say, I love this little statement. But I honestly feel that it's very true for our lives as believers. Often, not always, but often, the darkest night is before the brightest light. And that is just something to hold on to when, whatever it is, whether it's a physical situation, financial, relational, I am a firm believer that God is crazy faithful. And it's our job to just stay on the path. It's His job to go before us with that machete or whatever and clear the way. But we've just got to stay on the path. And I love one of my favorite verses: when you've done all to stand, stand therefore. You've done it all. You've done everything you can think of. Now what do? We stand. And we just do what we're called to do. One foot in front of the other.
So Kim, mentally, tell me some of the mental process that you and your family went through during all these times of burst of faith and challenges and disappointments. Tell me what that was like. Yeah,
you had just mentioned when we were offline here, identity. I think that's something fundamentally that every human has to, at some point in time, come face to face with. Why are we here? Who are we? Why did God allow us to be put on this place called planet Earth, And our answer at some point in time has got to become so real and alive that we're here for only one person, or one reason, and one person. And that is because we are children of God. One of my favorite themes in Scripture is that God calls us His children. The Bible says we are no longer slaves when we are brought into the kingdom. It's a phenomenal understanding that the God that created it all that we can see and all that we can't see, when we make that decision to be bought by him and come into his kingdom, we are now his children. And when we understand what that means to be a child of God and the resources that come from him and through him, we have it all. There's not a place that we have to live in fear. There's not a time that we have to go to bed worried. Yes, we do at times, but we don't have to, right?
Right, that's right.
Because when we know whose we are and who we are as children that have been bought and paid for, and we now live in a kingdom that is not of this world, we can have full expectancy, as we've mentioned several times, that it's not man's impossibility, it's God's possibility, that yes, all things can happen in and through him. And when we know who we are, all of a sudden we take this step into a place that the world is wide open and we can have expectancy that anything can happen. But I don't know that we get there until we fully understand who we are. And our identity is fully found in him. Because when we understand that, then we have everything that God is and God provides right here for every single one of us. That's a big deal.
It is a big deal.
It's a big deal.
Reminds me of Ephesians 1. We're adopted into his kingdom.
That's right.
I'm Dr. Marla from Dr. Marla Ministries, and I'm so excited about this program called All Things Are Possible. You know, Scripture says, with man it's impossible, but with God all things are possible. This ministry believes that all things are possible for you. With God, all things are possible. That means God has things in your life that you don't even think are possible can happen for you. God says he knows the plans he has for you, plans to prosper you, not to harm you, give you a hope and a future. This ministry is taking the gospel into the world. We're reaching the brokenhearted, the needy, the lost, those that need encouragement. So we'd like to ask you to partner with us. You can partner with us in several ways. Number one, you can go to my website, go to drmarla.org, go to partnership. And if the Lord leads you, you could give a financial seed. That would help us get on more TV networks to spread the good news of the gospel. We can also connect with you on social media. Go to Dr. Marla _ for Instagram or Twitter, or you can go to my Facebook page, go to Dr. Marla, and we're going to spread this good news through every way possible, through social media, TV network, and we are here to help you. We want to help you get above your circumstances. We want to help you rise above all those brokenhearted things that are happening in your life. We want you to go to higher depths and higher levels with the Lord, because the Lord is our only hope. So join me, go to drmarla.org, and we'd like to partner with you and help you with what you need.